It was a Thursday, that kind of midweek quiet where nothing seems unusual, or your mind is halfway toward the weekend and your body just wants a moment of stillness. I had just returned from the gym, dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and was halfway through slicing an apple when she walked in. Juliet. She wasn't wearing anything dramatic, just a slate gray dress, blazer tossed carelessly over one shoulder, heels clicking like punctuation marks against the floor. But her face was different. It was expressionless. That's what made it worse. No anger, no sadness, just cold decision. She placed a thick manila envelope on the kitchen counter like she was delivering a menu, then looked up at me and said, "I've inherited $10 million. I want a divorce. Get out by tonight." That was it. Not a pause, not a flicker of hesitation. Just the sentence, dropped like a guillotine. I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. I waited for the punchline, maybe a dry laugh, a cruel joke, even something to suggest I wasn't losing everything over breakfast. But she didn't laugh. She just stood there, arms crossed, like she'd just handed me my termination letter. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," she said. "My inheritance came through. There's no need to pretend anymore. I'm done. I want my space back. I want my life back." My jaw clenched involuntarily. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which she said them. 7 years of marriage, dinners cooked, nights we held each other after bad dreams, business strategies. I stayed up helping her build, all discarded like an unwanted draft. I looked down at the envelope. It had my name on it, bold, typed, no handwriting. That told me everything. She hadn't written this. She had prepared it, pre-planned, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. I opened it slowly, the paper slicing the tip of my finger as I pulled out the documents. A paper cut, but it felt like it bled everything. Inside were the divorce papers, a clean list of terms. She was keeping the house, the cars, the artwork, the accounts. I was being left with what I brought in, which, according to her declaration, was minimal. I let out a slow breath. Not anger, not sorrow, just the kind of disbelief that anchors itself in your bones. Then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, intentional. I turned and saw them standing there. Her twin brothers, Troy and Mason, 2 men who never did a single thing without a smirk on their faces. They leaned in the kitchen doorway like henchmen in a bad movie, their arms crossed, smugness radiating off them like cheap cologne. "She doesn't need you anymore," Troy muttered with a crooked smile. I didn't respond. I just looked at him for a moment, then back at her. She didn't even flinch, didn't correct him, didn't soften the blow. She just stood her ground. This was coordinated, I could see it now. Not a heat-of-the-moment decision. This was weeks, maybe months in the making. She'd waited until the money hit her account until she could surround herself with reinforcements, and then she'd launched her little coup. I stepped back from the counter and ran a hand through my hair. "So that's it. I asked you get your payday and I become disposable." She tilted her head like she was trying to understand why I was still standing there. "I don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. I stayed because I had to. Now I don't. The thing is, if she'd cried, I might have broken. If she'd yelled, I might have fought. But she was cold, calculated, detached. And I realized that the woman standing in front of me now wasn't the person I married. Or maybe she was. Maybe I had just refused to see it. My hand was still bleeding lightly from the paper cut. I wiped it on her napkin, then nodded slowly. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's what you want." She nodded once, like a queen granting an exit. Be gone before dinner. I walked past her, not looking back. Not yet. Not while they were watching. I went upstairs and entered the bedroom we once shared. It already felt foreign. As I opened the closet, I could see gaps, items missing. My cufflinks, my tablet, a framed photo of my late mother, gone. She'd been preparing for this. Probably had a bag of excuses lined up if I had noticed earlier. But I didn't because I trusted her. I opened my travel case and began to pack. Not much, just the essentials. The suit my father gave me, my old watch, the passport I kept locked away. I moved with purpose, folding each shirt with the kind of care you give to memories, not clothes. I could hear them downstairs talking, laughing. The sound made my stomach turn. I grabbed my phone, opened my banking app. The joint accounts were already inaccessible. My name had gone. Just like that. I smiled. Not out of humor, but because I realized something. They thought this was the end of me, but they had no idea who I really was. When I finally zipped my bag shut and took one last look at the room, I didn't feel grief. I felt focus. I walked slowly down the stairs, my suitcase trailing behind me. Juliet was in the kitchen now, pouring wine, the gall of it, a toast to betrayal. She didn't look up as I passed. Her brothers did. Troy tilted his head, clearly hoping for some reaction, some last word, but I gave him nothing. I walked out the front door and paused on the porch. Then I turned back and said, "Calm as steel. You'll regret this, all of you." They laughed. That was fine. Let them laugh. They wouldn't be laughing for long, not after what I had planned. Not once I reminded them exactly who they had underestimated. Because this wasn't the end. No, this was the beginning. I wasn't even halfway down the driveway before I heard her voice slice through the air like glass. "Hey, that bag stays." I stopped, my fingers wrapped tighter around the suitcase handle. The one bag I'd managed to pack with a shred of dignity left. I turned slightly, not all the way, just enough to see her storming out the front door barefoot, fury in her eyes, wine glass still in hand. "This is my personal stuff," I said as calmly as I could. Clothes I bought with my own money. The watch my father left me. Photos from my childhood. Juliet threw her hand up like I'd insulted her. "Everything in this house is under my name. Everything. And if you walk off with anything, it'll be theft." I stared at her in disbelief. "You really want to do this here, in front of your neighbors?" She didn't hesitate. "I don't care who's watching. You don't get to take anything from me." That's when I heard them again, Troy and Mason, footsteps pounding across the deck behind her like they'd just been waiting for the moment to jump in. They came into view, one on each side of her like twin security guards with a grudge and too much time on their hands. "Didn't you hear her?" Troy said, folding his arms. "Drop the bag." "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Mason added. I looked from one to the other. They were built like oak trees but spoke like teenagers trying to sound tough. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part of me wanted to snap, but I kept still. Years of swallowing things for the sake of peace had trained me well. "I'm not leaving without my things," I said again. "You can throw me out, but I won't walk away like a stray dog." That was when it happened. Troy moved first. I didn't even see the fist, just felt a burning tug at my scalp as he grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked my head backward. The suitcase dropped from my hand with a hard thud on the walkway. Before I could catch my balance, Mason was at my side, one arm hooked around my torso, the other slamming into my shoulder. I twisted, shouted, tried to break free, but they didn't stop. They dragged me down the front steps like I weighed nothing. My back hit each step hard, scraping against the stone, my arms flailing to grab anything. I heard the sound of fabric ripping. My shirt, my pride. I couldn't tell. Somewhere behind them, Juliet was yelling, "Get him out of here!" They threw me like a bag of trash onto the gravel at the bottom of the driveway. I hit the ground with a sick crunch, the kind that tells your bones something's going to bruise tomorrow. I stayed still for a moment, not because I was scared, but because I knew if I got up too fast I might lose control. And I couldn't afford to do that. Not now, not in front of them. I wiped my lip. Blood. A thin, sharp line. I stood slowly, quietly. Mason smirked. "You're lucky we didn't call the cops." Troy leaned against the porch rail like he'd just finished a workout. "You really thought she'd keep you after that check cleared?" Juliet stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face like stone. "This house was never yours," she said. "This life was never yours." I didn't answer. I just looked at her for a long, full second. Not at her makeup or her hair or the expensive robes she wore like armor. I looked at the part she didn't control. Her eyes. There was a flicker there, not regret, not sadness, but fear. Fear that I wasn't broken, that maybe I was just quiet. I reached down, picked up my suitcase, now scuffed and dirt-covered, and rolled my wrist to check my watch. Still ticking. Good. I looked back at all three of them, these so-called giants in their little castle, and said in the calmest tone I've ever used, "You'll regret this. All of you." Mason laughed like it was a punchline. You going to sue us? Cry to a judge, please. You have nothing." "You're just mad she finally figured you out." I smiled, a real one this time, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm wide awake." Juliet flinched, only slightly, but I saw it. She knew me better than they did, knew I wasn't a yeller, wasn't a fighter. I was a builder, a planner, and she had just given me something I hadn't had in years. A reason. I turned and walked away slowly, not limping, not running, just walking, my feet steady, my mind racing. Every step I took was another nail in the coffin of the life she thought she ended. Every footfall was a promise. Because here's the thing no one tells you. When someone strips everything away from you, you stop being afraid of loss. You start seeing clearly. You remember who you are. And I remembered. I remembered every late night I spent teaching myself coding while she slept. Every investor meeting I took while pretending I was just consulting. Every share I bought under different names. Every paper I filed that she never bothered to read. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the spark. They thought throwing me out of the house would be the climax, but it was just the beginning of the first chapter. They thought I had nothing left, but they'd forgotten one thing. I built her, and I could build again. This time without her, this time better, smarter, stronger. And when I did, I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't knock, I'd just show up. And they'd know they dragged the wrong man down those stairs, and that everything they laughed at that day was going to burn down in silence. The first night on the outside, I stayed at a hotel, a quiet one by the edge of town with low lighting and worn carpets. Nothing flashy, just somewhere with a bed, a desk, and silence. That's all I needed, silence. It's funny how after someone tries to destroy you, the first thing you miss is peace. Not revenge, not power. Just peace. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time, staring at the wall. My body was still sore from being manhandled like a rag doll. My lips swollen, my scalp tender. But inside I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Like when you hold your breath underwater and finally rise to the surface. They thought they had thrown me out, left me with nothing. But what they didn't understand, what Juliet never cared to ask, was who I really was before I ever walked into her world. She met me when I was quiet, as she liked to say, low maintenance, a man who didn't mind fading into the background. She used to brag about how I didn't take up space. What she never asked was why I didn't. Because I had already done that part of life, the spotlight, the risk, the chaos, and I had walked away from it all for peace, for simplicity, for her. I used to be Arland Rivers, not the husband who helped with the books, not the man who used to work in tech. I was co-founder of Zephyr. We built military-grade cybersecurity systems. Our software protected data for governments, hospitals, even space programs. We sold it 5 years ago. Quietly split the deal clean. I took my $18.2 million payout and vanished from the news cycle because I wanted to build a life without flashing cameras and paranoid meetings. I wanted a home, a woman I could believe in. And for a while, I thought Juliet was that woman. She never knew. She never wanted to know. She liked the version of me that wore jeans and made omelets on Sundays. She told people I did freelance work, and I let her. It was easier. Let her have the spotlight. Let her father believe he was the one who inspired her to launch her own brand. Let her brothers joke about how I was good with tools. I let them think I was small. Why? Because I didn't care if they thought I was powerful. I cared if she thought I was good. Turns out that wasn't enough. Now, sitting in that dimly lit hotel room with a bag of clothes and a bleeding lip, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was awake. I opened my laptop. Still had it. Still clean, still fast. I logged into one of my backup servers, accessed a series of encrypted files I hadn't touched in years. There they were. Portfolios, assets, holdings. I hadn't just sat around after selling Zephyr. I'd invested smartly, diversely, internationally, real estate, clean energy, artificial intelligence, most of it in trusts that didn't carry my name. My real net worth, closer to $27 million, not including the land I owned in Utah or the licensing rights I'd quietly acquired through my dummy corporation, Tundra Holdings. Juliet didn't know any of this because she never asked. She never noticed the trips I took for coding jobs were actually meetings with hedge fund managers. She never questioned the non-eScript mail I got from the Isle of Man or the Cayman Islands. She thought I was basic, and I let her, because I thought love didn't require resumes. That's on me. I scrolled through the list of properties, accounts, and companies I had kept in the shadows. Nothing flashy, just clean and insulated. I wasn't the richest man alive, but I wasn't the broken fool they thought they tossed onto the curb either. They had poked the bear, and now the bear was wide awake. I made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just bullet points typed into a notes app. But every name on that list, they had laughed at me, mocked me, touched me without consent, tried to erase me. Juliet, Troy, Mason. I wouldn't scream at them. I wouldn't threaten them. I just start pulling the threads quietly, one by one. I took out my phone and called a name I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Drayton Wells. Old friend, real estate lawyer, smart, meticulous. And he owed me badly. He answered on the second ring. "Arlen, it's time," I said. Silence on the other end then. You're serious? Dead serious. Tell me where to meet you. By the next morning, I was sitting across from him in his office, papers spread across the mahogany table. He blinked when he saw the assets. They have no idea this is you. None. Damn. I just smiled. Let's begin with the Montgomery estate. He raised a brow. Her family's. It's not fully theirs. Not yet. He flipped through the scanned documents. Since I handed him a joint stipulation from Grandfather Montgomery's estate plan. You're listed here as co-trustee in the event of a legal separation or divorce. Yes, Juliet's brothers are building on the land. I nodded with permits based on incomplete transfers. The land technically belongs to a dormant LLC, which I now control. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You really are the most polite wolf I've ever met. No, I said. I'm just done being underestimated. We filed the injunction that same afternoon. It would take a few days to process, but when the sheriff showed up at that gate, they'd remember who I was. And more importantly, they'd realize they never knew me at all. The thing about the trail is that it doesn't just break you, it sharpens you if you let it. Most people lash out, burn bridges, throw tantrums. That's not me. I don't explode. I recalibrate. And when I walked into Drayton's office that morning after leaving the hotel, I was already 3 steps into a game they didn't know we were playing. Drayton leaned back in his chair, staring at the old estate documents like they were buried treasure. He tapped the screen with a grin. So, they really don't know about this? Nope. You're still listed as co-trustee in the Montgomery Trust. That's wild. I nodded. Her grandfather and I had a different kind of relationship. Every Thursday, we'd have dinner. He liked to talk shop, philosophy, legacy. He didn't trust his grandsons. And Juliet, he loved her, but he didn't respect her judgment. Drayton chuckled. And now those grandsons are gutting his guest house to build a pool hall on land that hasn't been properly transferred, which gives us leverage. He looked at me with that same slow, cautious smile I'd seen him wear back in college when we hacked the campus firewall just for fun. You're playing the long game. I'm just restoring balance. Within hours, we filed the paperwork. Clean, quiet, no announcement. An injunction to halt construction on the Montgomery estate based on unclear ownership and a pending co-trustee dispute. It would take a few days to go through the system. Perfect. That gave me time to prep the next piece. I left Drayton's office and walked 2 blocks to a place I hadn't visited in over a year, a storage unit on the east side of town. Inside, buried under old equipment and boxes of archived data, were the files I needed. Juliet used to tease me about being paranoid, always keeping hard copies of legal papers. Everything's online now, she'd say. Sure, but firewalls can be hacked. Paper is quiet. And in these boxes, I had copies of offshore transfers, silent partnerships, and real estate deeds, all under names she never knew. I spent the next 2 nights reviewing everything. Old passwords still worked. The trusts were intact. The shell companies were undisturbed. It felt like waking up an old machine, slow at first, but deadly once running. The first financial move I made was subtle. I rerouted dividends from one of my European investments, a modest property group in Lisbon, straight into a newly opened local account under a fresh alias. Then, I did something even simpler. I purchased a high-powered server setup for home use, delivered to a private office. I just leased under a different name. I was rebuilding the lab, and I wasn't alone. Drayton wasn't the only person I reached out to. I called Dahlia Ward, a corporate litigator and financial strategist who once helped me shut down a fraudulent acquisition before Juliet and I ever met. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, but when she heard what happened, she said, "Tell me where to show up and what to wear." 2 days later, she was at my office in a navy blue suit, heels that clicked with authority and a fire in her eyes. "She really dragged you out by your hair?" she asked as we sipped coffee. "Yep, good," she said, setting her mug down. Then, "She has no idea what's coming." We worked nonstop. I laid out everything, my holdings, her known assets, the company. Dahlia grinned as she reviewed it. "You're going to win this war in silence. That's the point." For days later, the Montgomery estate injunction was approved. The sheriff delivered it in person. I wasn't there to watch, but Drayton told me what happened. The workers had already started demolishing the guest house roof. Troy and Mason were outside laughing about a hot tub design when the patrol car pulled into the long gravel driveway. The moment the envelope was handed over, everything stopped. Hard hats came off, power tools shut down, work trucks reversed out of the property like they were retreating from a crime scene. The twins argued with the officer, yelled, postured, claimed ignorance. But the deputy wasn't interested in drama. He just pointed to the official seal and said, "This structure is no longer authorized for modification until ownership is clarified in court." Ownership, a word they had never questioned, a word they assumed was their birthright. Juliet called me that night. I was expecting the voicemail, but this time she used a new tone, less arrogance, more confusion. "You're behind this, aren't you?" she said. "Don't play dumb, Marlon. The sheriff showed up at my family's estate. My brothers nearly got arrested. You're trying to ruin us." I let her talk, let her burn out her energy. Then I spoke calmly. "You never asked how your grandfather and I got along. You never wondered why he always poured me the wine first at dinner. He didn't just like me, Juliet. He trusted me more than he trusted your brothers. Maybe even more than he trusted you." Her silence was like static on the line. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Nothing you're offering," I said, "but you'll be hearing from my attorney soon." I ended the call before she could reply. The following day, I got a notification. An emergency meeting had been called by the Montgomery family lawyers. The estate was frozen. Her brothers were officially barred from conducting further renovations or transactions until the trust dispute was resolved. Juliet's name was now entangled in court documents, and this was just the beginning. They'd poked the bear. Now the bear had claws, and I was only warming up. By the time the court order froze the estate, the cracks had started to show. I wasn't sitting on some throne cackling in triumph. I was at my desk in a small rented office space with a coffee that had gone cold, watching the whole house of cards start to lean. And the best part? I hadn't even laid a finger on the structure. I just pulled out the pin they never noticed was holding it all together. Juliet's brothers had started construction on the guest house weeks before the inheritance money even cleared. Overconfident, arrogant, and dumb. They assumed the land would transfer smoothly to Juliet. They assumed I wouldn't be in the picture long enough to matter. They were wrong on both counts. Now they were facing legal action from the local planning department for unauthorized construction on contested property. Contractors were threatening to sue them for breach of contract. Equipment rental fees were stacking up, and the renovation dead in the water. It was a domino effect, and I was just sitting back letting gravity do its work. Dahlia sent me a message. "Probate hearing is confirmed. Juliet's being summoned." I smirked. She would have to stand before a judge and answer for the clause her family overlooked. A clause hidden in Grandfather Montgomery's will. One line buried in the fine print. In the event of dissolution of marriage, co-rusty responsibilities and partial ownership default to the surviving spouse. Me? I still remember the day I found that clause. Juliet and I were newlyweds, and her grandfather invited me to his lake house for a private dinner. Just the two of us. He handed me a glass of scotch and said, "Juliet's smart, but not always wise. You're steady." He grounded. I thought it was a compliment. Now I realized it was a warning. The probate hearing was held in a stone building downtown. I didn't attend in person. I didn't need to. Dahlia handled everything. I just watched the fallout from a distance. According to her report, Juliet walked in wearing a pearl gray suit and defiance like perfume. She thought it would be a routine formality, something she could handle with a few sharp words and a lawyer on retainer. Then, Dahlia stood up and presented the class. The judge's brows raised. The room got quiet. Juliet's lawyer whispered something to her, and for the first time in years, she lost her composure in public. She stormed out during recess. Dahlia told me, muttered something about you never being important enough to be written into the will. I laughed out loud at that one. She really didn't know. She had no clue. Not about the dinners, the trust, or that her grandfather kept me in the loop. Dahlia paused before continuing. She asked me how you knew about the clause. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I told her the truth. That you'd earned it. That you didn't need to spy. You just needed to read. Later that afternoon, Juliet called again, but this time her tone wasn't angry. It was tight, afraid like someone trying to keep control of a rope slipping through their fingers. What is it you want, Arlen? She asked quietly. I stayed silent for a beat, letting the question hang there, because I knew it wasn't really a question. It was a surrender, an unspoken recognition that her carefully stacked empire was starting to wobble. I don't want anything, I said. I'm just claiming what was always mine. The land isn't yours. It was never just yours either. You just thought I'd be too passive to fight back. A pause. Then he really liked you, didn't he? He respected me, I replied. There's a difference. I ended the call before she could respond, not out of pettiness, but because I knew she needed silence more than she needed answers. Silence is where regret breeds. A few days later, Mason showed up outside the office. I saw him through the glass door wearing a too-tight dress shirt and a fake smile. He knocked, waited, then knocked again harder. I opened the door halfway. Bold of you to come here. Look, man, he said, scratching his jaw. We got off on the wrong foot. You mean the part where you and your brother dragged me down a flight of stairs? He went slightly. That was a misunderstanding. Things were heated. Very. Juliet's been rattled lately. He continued, his voice now shifting into that of a salesman trying to close a deal. You got your little win with the estate. Let's not blow this out of proportion. I stepped aside, letting him see the whiteboard on my wall covered in diagrams, timelines, and case notes. The expression on his face changed. What is all that research? I said simply. Preparation for what? I looked him dead in the eye. For everything else. He left quickly. I knew the message had been delivered. The Montgomery name wasn't untouchable anymore, and the man they treated like an accessory wasn't going to stay quiet. Within the week, rumors started to swirl in their business circles. Something about a pending lawsuit, inheritance trouble, frozen property assets. Investors got spooked. A luxury renovation project tied to the Montgomery name was put on pause. One of Juliet's public endorsements, some influencer skincare brand, quietly dropped her from a campaign. It didn't take much, just a few whispers in the right ears. Just enough truth to make people question the rest. I didn't have to destroy her brand. She was doing that all by herself. I just made sure the spotlight stayed on. And as I sat in my office one evening watching emails come in, hearing the buzz build and watching the empire tremble, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about precision. And they just learned the cost of underestimating a man who once built a tech firm from scratch, walked away from millions for peace, and was now coming back for justice with a calculator, a contract, and a quiet, unshakable calm. The house of cards had begun to tilt, and I hadn't even blown yet. Juliet was thorough. I'll give her that. After she threw me out, she moved fast. Too fast. She froze our joint bank accounts before the ink on the divorce papers even dried, changed the passwords to every streaming service, removed my name from the health insurance, canceled the gym membership I'd been using for 6 years, and even revoked the credit card I used for groceries. She thought she had stripped me clean, like I was just some dependent husband she could unplug like a phone charger. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to know, was that I never needed her money to survive. I had been running Tundra Holdings for 5 years. She never once asked what it was. Tundra was quiet, hidden in plain sight, a holding company set up through a law firm in Delaware with a trust name and zero personal branding. Through Tundra, I owned 3 small tech patents, a pair of beachfront condos in Ghana, and something else far more valuable: her brand name, Juliet Montgomery's signature collection. Years ago, before she even launched the company, she was just a woman with a dream and a sketchbook. She came to me late one night, wine glass in hand, asking for help filing a business name. She had no idea where to begin. So I handled it, secured the name, paid the fees, filed the trademarks. She promised we'd transfer it into her name once things got going. We never did. Not because I was trying to trap her, I just forgot. Life moved fast. She assumed it was hers and I didn't correct her. The royalties came through Tundra. The licensing was clean. No one questioned it. Why would they? I was just the husband in the background until she made me an enemy sitting in my office. Now I opened the dashboard. Tundra Holdings, active, profitable, untouched. She never thought to check it. Never thought to ask who owned the roof under her empire. I clicked into the contract folder and scrolled down to the licensing agreement. Tundra Holdings licenses Juliet Montgomery's signature collection to JSC LLC for brand use and monetization. I highlighted it, clicked Terminate. A warning popped up. This will revoke all external usage rights of this trademark. Confirm. I hit yes. Just like that, her brand had no legal right to use her own name. The next 48 hours moved fast. I sent official takedown notices to every distributor carrying her product line, retailers, subscription boxes, boutique chains. A standard cease and desist letter citing trademark breach, legal, surgical, emotionless. Then I waited. Not long. Day 2, I got my first call from one of her distributors. Hi, we just received a legal notice regarding the trademark for the Juliet Montgomery collection. Can you confirm this is accurate? Yes. The licensing agreement has been revoked. Will there be a new brand identity we should shift to? Not at this time. Understood. They pulled her listings before noon. Then another call, and another. By the end of the day, her skincare line had been removed from 7 major platforms. That evening, I sat back in my chair as my phone lit up. Voicemail. Juliet. I pressed play. Arlen, what the hell did you do? I just got a call from Cynthia at Elvita. She said, your name's on some contract. My inventory is being pulled. What is going on? I could hear the panic bleeding through her voice. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Real fear. The kind that only comes when you realize you've been dancing over a cliff and just looked down. I didn't call back. Not right away. Let her feel the silence. Let her sit in the space where she thought she had power and now finds air. On day 3, she sent a text. You're ruining everything I built. For what? Revenge. I stared at it for a while, then replied with one sentence. You're not taking anything from here, remember? No response. She knew. She remembered that night. The driveway, the screaming. Her words spat out like venom. You're not taking anything from here. She'd said it like a queen dismissing a servant. Now those same words had come back like a boomerang with a blade. Later that night, Dahlia called me. She was laughing. She called my office 3 times. And she wants to negotiate. I leaned back in my chair. Too late. I figured you'd say that. She used the brand to erase me. She stood on it like it was built without my hands. Now she'll feel what it's like to lose something that never fully belonged to her. She's scrambling. Arlen. Her sponsors are backing out. The wholesalers are freezing shipments, and there's a rumor going around that she might not legally own her own label. Word travels fast. Good. We sat in silence for a second. Then Dahlia added, "I've known you a long time. I've seen you take losses and stay quiet, but I've never seen you like this. I've never needed to be like this. Because when you give everything for peace and someone responds with war, you learn how to fight in silence. Not with fists, not with yelling, but with documents, strategy, timing. They kicked me out thinking I had nothing. Now she had nothing that didn't have my name on it. I checked the trademark registration again. Still mine, still active, still untouchable. I didn't laugh, didn't gloat. I just sipped my coffee and stared at the screen. They triggered the storm. They just never expected the rain to fall only on them. It was only a matter of time before they came crawling back. First it was silence, just the deafening quiet of a crumbling empire. Then came the anger, threats, voicemails, desperate emails dressed up as legal language. But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The louder they got, the more power I had. The next message wasn't from Juliet. It was from Troy, the same man who had yanked me down the stairs like I was garbage. Now he was sending a neatly worded email requesting a mature and private discussion. I almost laughed, but I agreed on my terms. A public cafe downtown, neutral ground, no shadows to hide in. I arrived early and chose a seat facing the entrance. No suit, no flashy car, just jeans, a dark shirt, and the confidence of a man who knew he didn't have to yell to be heard. They walked in 5 minutes late. Troy in a tight blazer, Mason in sunglasses, indoors like a clown, and Juliet between them, holding her bag like a shield. She didn't speak first. Troy did. "We appreciate you meeting with us," he said, trying to sound calm. Mason leaned in. "There's no need for things to get worse." I raised an eyebrow. "Worse for who?" They both looked at Juliet. Her mask was still on perfect posture, neutral expression, but her eyes gave her away. They were glassy, uneven, not angry, exhausted. She tried to speak, failed, then tried again. I didn't know you still had access to the trademark." "You didn't ask," I said simply. "I assumed. You assumed I was stupid. You assumed I'd roll over and disappear." "No," she said quickly. "I assumed you'd never use it against me." I tilted my head. Why not? Silence. She didn't have an answer. None of them did, because the truth was simple. They thought I was too weak to defend myself, that I would walk away like I came, quietly, invisibly. Mason cleared his throat. "Look, we're not here to rehash old wounds." "Good," I said. "Then let's talk about how you're going to fix the new ones." Juliet's eyes flicked up at me for just a moment. Something cracked there. Not the whole mask, just a fine line across the surface. "What do you want, Arlen?" she asked. There it was. The real question, the one she had been dancing around for weeks. I leaned forward slowly, not aggressive, just enough to make sure every word landed. "I want what you tried to steal, what you pretended was yours alone." The land, the brand, the narrative. I want the truth back in my name. That's not a legal term, Mason said. It's not legal advice, I replied. It's a condition. Troy frowned. You're trying to ruin our family. I sipped my drink. No, I'm just showing people who your family really is. Juliet's voice dropped lower. What would it take for this to stop? I looked her in the eyes. Calm, direct. A public apology, one that admits what you did, one that clears my name and confirms my role in everything you built. That's unreasonable. No, Mason, I cut in. What was unreasonable was dragging a man by his hair down a flight of stairs in front of his neighbors. What was unreasonable was freezing his accounts, slandering him to family, friends, and laughing while erasing his contributions. Troy shifted uncomfortably. Juliet swallowed hard. I built that brand, she whispered. It was my vision, and I never said it wasn't. But I filed the trademark. I protected it. I supported it when it was nothing more than a sketch and a dream. I paid for the prototype runs. I negotiated the first supplier contract you forgot to read. I never asked for credit, Juliet, until you turned on me like I was a stranger. Silence. That was the moment it happened. The mask cracked fully this time. She blinked rapidly, eyes moist, lips slightly trembling. Not the overacted kind, the real kind, the one you try to hide in public when the weight of everything hits you at once. I didn't think you'd fight back, she said softly. I know. She looked down, then away. The world around us carried on, clinking cutlery, quiet laughter, a child somewhere giggling in the background. But at that table, it was just us. For people sitting on the wreckage of arrogance and assumption. Juliet reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. She placed it gently on the table. I didn't touch it. It's a statement, she said. It doesn't say everything, but it's a start. A public acknowledgement of your role, your ownership, your partnership. I stared at it. Why now? Because I'm losing everything, she whispered. And you're not yelling. You're not gloating. You're just winning. That part stung her the most. I think that I didn't come back with fire, that I came back with facts, with structure, with precision, that I didn't need to humiliate her to defeat her. Troy looked at me. If she signs it, will you stop? No, I said plainly, but I'll consider it the beginning of an ending, a civilized one. Mason rolled his eyes. This is all about pride. No, I said, rising from my seat. This is about justice, something your family's never respected. I picked up the paper and walked out without another word. Outside, the sun was warm. My heart wasn't racing. My palms weren't sweaty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, balanced. She had finally seen me. Not the ghost husband, not the handyman with a laptop, not the invisible investor. The man, the builder, the one they tried to erase. And now that the mask had cracked, there was no putting it back on. People think revenge is loud. They imagine screaming matches, dramatic confrontations, maybe someone throwing a glass across the room. But I've learned something different, something quieter. Revenge, when done right, isn't chaos. It's control. Not in the shouting, but in the silence that follows. Not in the flame, but in the shadows that spread when you remove someone's light. That's why I bought the ad space. A full-page spread in the Globe Times, Juliet's favorite magazine. She once told a journalist during an interview that being featured there was her definition of legacy. She framed that article in her home office. It was still hanging the last time. The ad took up the entire back page, a clean white background, centered, unmissable text, and elegant black font. To the Montgomery family, thank you for showing me who you really are. I forgive you, but I'll never forget. I've moved on, stronger, sharper, free. And below that, the logo of my new firm, Rivers Reclaim Group, a consulting agency for betrayed spouses. For every man and woman who'd ever been thrown out, erased, blindsided, and told they didn't matter. This was a place to rebuild, quietly, powerfully. I didn't need to rub salt in the wound. I simply let the world know that I was still here, still standing, and now I was helping others do the same. The ad ran on a Sunday. By Monday, my inbox had over 200 inquiries. By Wednesday, I had my first client, a woman from upstate thrown out by her husband after she put him through medical school. She cried during our Zoom call. Said she didn't want revenge, just peace. I told her peace was possible. But sometimes peace required firewalls, forensic accounting, and a lawyer who didn't blink. And I knew just the team to give her that. Juliet, meanwhile, was crumbling. The public apology she gave at our last meeting didn't fix things, not really. Her brand, already under scrutiny after the trademark fiasco, took a nosedive. Retailers who had once boasted about being powered by Juliet's passion now quietly removed her name from their catalogs. Then the influencer fallout began. She'd spent years curating her image, dinners with fashion editors, photo-oots in Tuscany, interviews where she smiled like betrayal never lived in her bones. But the moment my ad dropped, everything changed. People started digging. Screenshots resurfaced. A post from a year ago where she thanked my husband for being my calm while I chased the storm. Someone commented, "Is this the same man you kicked out of the house when the inheritance came in?" The comment got thousands of likes. Her sponsors noticed. 2 beauty companies dropped her within a week. A luxury haircare brand issued a vague, realigning with our values statement that didn't mention her name, but everyone knew. She posted a video. Tearful, filtered, practiced. "I've made mistakes," she said, voice trembling just the right amount. "I was in pain. I acted from fear, but I never meant to hurt anyone." It might have worked, except the next day the Globe Times published a follow-up. An editorial piece titled, "The Cost of Power When Love is Just a Brand Strategy." The article didn't accuse her of anything outright, but it asked hard questions. Questions like, what happens when a woman builds a business on borrowed loyalty? What happens when the person in the background decides to speak? They included my ad in the piece, blurred out in the background, but unmistakable. I didn't write a rebuttal, didn't give an interview, didn't say a word because silence, when earned, is louder than noise. Juliet called again, this time from a private number. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Please, can we talk? Just for 5 minutes." She sounded tired, like someone who'd been walking through fog for too long and finally realized it was smoke. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Because here's what no one tells you about healing. You don't owe it to the person who broke you. That week I hosted a free workshop online, Rebuilding After Betrayal. I expected maybe 40 attendees. We got over 600 divorced women, abandoned fathers, stay-at-home spouses cut out of business deals, quiet geniuses who had been used, discarded, or erased. And every single one of them said the same thing in some form. I just want to feel seen again. That became our mission. Not revenge, restoration. The Rivers Reclaim Group grew fast. Too fast, maybe, but I was ready. I hired 2 paralegals, partnered with a firm in New York, built out a referral network. The money came in, so did the stories. And Juliet, she vanished. Her social accounts went dark. Her website redirected to a broken page. The Juliet Montgomery Signature Collection was officially marked discontinued on 4 major beauty platforms. I got a letter from her lawyers and offered to sell back the brand for pennies. I declined. It wasn't about the name. It was about the principle. One morning about a month later, I stood in front of a mirror. Same man, same eyes. Same steady hands, but different. Not angry, just clear. Clear about who I was, what I'd survived, and who I was becoming. My phone buzzed. An email alert. Another client. Another story. Another life ready to be rebuilt. I smiled because the woman who once told me I didn't take up space had watched me carve out a place in the world without raising my voice. And in doing so, I'd become what she never expected. Unforgettable. I didn't think I'd ever walk through that front door again. Not after what happened. Not after the staircase, the suitcase, the blood on my lip. But life has a way of circling back, especially when you've done the hard work of standing still while others collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. It was a Wednesday morning when Dahlia called. Her voice was casual, but I heard the smile tuck behind her words. The estate's been revalued. Your counterclaim was approved this morning. I blinked. Wait, already? She chuckled. You're back on title, fully. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the window in my office, watching sunlight stretch across the hardwood floor. Arlen, she said, it's yours again. Every inch. That afternoon I drove out to the property. I didn't rush. I wasn't going for war or nostalgia. I was going to see what remained after they tried to erase me. The gates were still as grand as I remembered, black iron etched with the Montgomery family crest. I pulled up slowly, waiting for the guard to stop me. There was no guard, just movers. 2 trucks in the driveway, boxes being carried out, tape guns screeching, labels written in frantic, messy handwriting. Juliet had chosen to leave. Her attorney had called Dahlia the night before, offered to vacate quietly if we agreed not to pursue damages. I'd already gotten everything I needed emotionally, legally, financially. I didn't need to crush her. She was doing that all by herself. The door creaked when I opened it. Same marble floors, same cold air, but the house felt smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually. It had lost its illusion. Gone were the echoes of fake laughter, the staged dinner parties, the tight smiles meant to impress people who didn't care. I walked through the foyer and into the living room. The walls were bare. No paintings, no curated bookshelf, no matching gold accent vases lined up just so. There was a single box in the corner marked miscellaneous. Inside it, a photo of Juliet and her brothers at the estate launch party. She was in her white power suit, the same one she wore the night she told me to leave. I didn't pick it up, just stared at it a moment, then turned away. I walked room to room, taking it all in. The upstairs office where I used to handle the finances for her business before I learned she'd replaced my name on everything. The guest room where her brothers once slept off their hangovers after long nights of pretending they owned the place. The master bedroom where she handed me divorce papers with the smugness of someone who thought they'd won. It was empty now, except for the ghost of a life that had never really been mine. In the kitchen, I found a few stray glasses and a crumpled note left on the counter. It just read, "I thought this house would protect me. Turns out, you were the only one who ever did." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. I folded the note, not out of sentiment, but because it was the first time in months she'd said something true. A few minutes later, I stepped outside to the patio where the guest house once stood. Now, it was a disaster. The renovation had been halted mid-P project. Wood beams exposed, tiles scattered. The foundation cracked where they tried to pour a jacuzzi pit. The dreams they had built on stolen ground had collapsed right into the dirt. I stood there, hands in my pockets, just listening. Silence. Not the empty kind, the peaceful kind. I didn't rebuild it into a luxury suite or a game room or a guest lodge. I turned it into a justice center. 6 months later, the house became the headquarters of the Rivers Foundation for Reinvention, a non-profit initiative I started to help people reclaim their lives after emotional and financial abuse, divorce, betrayal, disinheritance, gaslighting, the quiet traumas that leave loud echoes. The first floor became an intake center for legal referrals and transitional support. The upper floor housed a temporary residence program for clients leaving toxic households. We called it the Reclaim Wing. The Montgomery name scrubbed from the deed. All of it. No trace left. One of the first people we helped was a woman named L.R.A., mid-30s, quiet voice, big eyes filled with shame she didn't deserve. Her ex had emptied her accounts, claimed her invention as his own, and left her with nothing but debt and therapy bills. She cried when we helped her secure a patent under her own name, said it was the first time she felt real in 2 years. Another man, Jacob, was a retired firefighter whose son had stolen his pension and forged a signature on a reverse mortgage. He walked into our center defeated, walked out 2 weeks later with a financial advisor, an attorney, and a new will. I didn't just rebuild a house. I built a lighthouse, not to signal my triumph, but to guide others through the storm. Because what they tried to bury me with, I turned it into bricks. Not revenge, legacy. Juliet never returned to the property. I suspect she didn't have the stomach to. Her name popped up once or twice in small blocks, a podcast interview where she talked about lessons learned and mistakes that made her stronger. I didn't listen to the full thing. I didn't need to. She lost the one thing she valued more than money: control. I never gloated, never showed up uninvited, never called to say, "I told you so." I didn't need to say it. The house said it for me. Every person who walked through those doors, every survivor who found safety inside those walls, every life rebuilt, every truth restored, it all whispered the same thing. You never should have dragged him out, because now he owns everything you tried to take. It was almost poetic, really. A year to the day since she told me to pack my things and be gone by dinner. I stood on a stage under soft lights, a microphone in my hand, and an auditorium full of people watching as I shared my story. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a podcast. It was the Global Tech and Ethics Summit, a gathering of thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators from around the world. A place I hadn't been invited to in nearly 6 years. Back when I had walked away from the tech industry after selling Zephyr Tech, I thought I was done with stages. But life, as it turns out, wasn't done with me. The host, a sharp woman named Irene Cho, introduced me simply. Please welcome Arlon Rivers, the man who reclaimed everything. There was polite applause, respectful and curious. Most of them had read about me in one article or another. The man who launched a startup vanished and reappeared, not with a new app, but with a non-profit that shook the divorce world to its core. I walked up slowly. No nerves, no pretense, just presence. Marisol sat in the front row, my wife. Yes, wife. And beside her, our daughter, 5 months old, fast asleep against her chest. I never imagined this would be my life again. After Juliet, after the betrayal, the dragging, the silence. I didn't think I'd love again. But life, when you clear out the wreckage, has a strange way of blooming. Marisol had seen me at my lowest, not the part where I was tossed out like furniture, but the aftermath, the rebuilding. She met me not as the man who'd been broken, but the one who chose to rise anyway. We weren't flashy. We didn't wear matching luxury watches or take sunset selfies in Greece. We were steady, quiet, real. And that was enough. I adjusted the mic,
looked out at the faces, waiting for some Ted-worthy insight, and smiled. "You all want to know how I built Zephyr Tech," I began, "but what I'd rather tell you is how I rebuilt myself. Because that took longer, cost more, and changed me more than any tech ever could." There was a hum of agreement. I kept going. Last year on this exact day, I was standing in a driveway with blood on my lip and everything I thought I loved behind a locked door. I'd been dragged out of my house, literally told I wasn't needed anymore, that I didn't own anything, that I was disposable. I paused and let it hang. A few people shifted in their seats. Some nodded. I didn't yell. I didn't fight back that night. I didn't curse or scream or throw anything. I just looked at them and said, "You'll regret this." Then I walked away. I could see Irene in the wings, arms folded, eyes locked in. She wasn't checking a timer. She was listening. "I wasn't bluffing," I said. I'd spent years shrinking myself so someone else could shine, letting people believe I was just the quiet guy in the background, a helpful husband, a sidekick. I stepped forward, one hand gesturing. But here's the thing. Just because someone forgets your worth doesn't mean it disappears. It just waits, quietly, until you're ready to reclaim it. A slow clap started in the back. I didn't stop. Within a year, I took back everything they tried to erase: the land, the brand, the dignity. And I didn't do it with revenge in mind. I did it with vision, precision, calm. I turned and glanced at the screen behind me where the Rivers Reclaimed Group logo glowed proudly. Now I run a foundation that helps others do the same, not by yelling louder, not by throwing punches, but by building again, smarter, cleaner, from the ashes of what was lost. I could see a few teary eyes, people nodding, a man in the second row mouthing, "Thank you." Then came the question that always comes. Someone raised a hand, a journalist I recognized. "What advice?" he asked. "Would you give someone who's just been betrayed by the person they love the most?" I looked at him for a moment. No rush, no dramatic pause, just the truth. "Don't yell," I said. "Don't chase. Don't sink to their level. Just build in silence. And let your success choke every lie they ever told about you." The room went still. Then the applause came, not thunderous, not performative, but real, long, deep. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. Not fans, survivors, widows, single dads, entrepreneurs who'd lost everything. A woman who whispered, "You saved me from going back." I nodded to each of them, took no credit, just listened. Later, as I stepped off the stage, Marisol wrapped one arm around my waist. Our daughter stirred in her carrier, yawned, and clutched at my shirt with a tiny hand. "You did it," Marisol whispered. "No," I said. "I became it." On the drive home, the city lights blurred past our windows. I thought of the Juliet who had once smirked while saying, "You're not taking anything from here." And now, a year later, I sat in a car I owned beside a woman who saw me, really saw me. And in the back seat was a little girl with my smile. I checked the watch on my wrist, the one Juliet had once tried to claim in court. She lost that claim, like everything else. But it wasn't the loss that mattered. It was the realization. She thought it was over when she threw me out. She thought that dragging me down the stairs, freezing my accounts, and rewriting history meant she'd won. But she forgot something important. You can't destroy someone who knows how to rebuild. You can't bury a man who remembers where he planted his roots. So as we pulled into our driveway, I smiled. Not out of revenge, out of peace. Because the man they dragged out by his hair, he didn't just survive.
He became the blueprint, and now he owns the world they used to rule.